At 72, the tragedy of Pierce Brosnan is not something you can see on the surface. Because if you only look at the image the world knows, you see confidence, elegance, and a man who once embodied James Bond with effortless charm. But the truth is far more complex. Before the fame, before the recognition, there was a boy growing up in Ireland with a life shaped by absence. His father left when he was an infant, and his mother had to move away for work, leaving him to be raised by relatives. That kind of childhood does something to a person. It teaches independence early, but it also creates a quiet sense of longing that never fully disappears. For Pierce Brosnan, that longing didn't turn into weakness, it turned into drive. Acting became more than just a skill. It became an escape, a way to step into different lives, to feel control in a world that once felt uncertain. He trained in London, dedicating himself to the craft, slowly building a career piece by piece. And then, something changed his life in a way success never could. He met Cassandra Harris. She wasn't just someone he loved. She became the stability he had never truly known. With her, life felt grounded. He stepped into a family, adopting her children, and building something real, something lasting. When their son was born, it felt like everything he had missed in childhood was finally being restored. For the first time, life felt complete. At the same time, his career was rising. Opportunities expanded, recognition followed, and eventually, he stepped into the role that would define him forever. As James Bond, he wasn't just playing a character, he was redefining it. Calm, intelligent, controlled, yet human in a way audiences connected with instantly. From the outside, it looked like the perfect life. A man with a strong family, a powerful career, and global admiration. But life doesn't follow perfect narratives. Behind the scenes, something was beginning to unfold that no one could see. Cassandra Harris was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And just like that, everything shifted. Not all at once, but slowly, quietly. The kind of change that creeps into everyday life until nothing feels the same anymore. Hospital visits became part of the routine. Treatments, uncertainty, moments of hope, followed by fear. It was a reality that couldn't be controlled, no matter how strong you tried to be. For a man known worldwide as unshakable, this was something entirely different. There was no script to follow, no role to play, no way to fix what was happening. This was real life, and it was happening to the person he loved most. Strength, in moments like these, doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't come with speeches or recognition. It shows up in silence, in staying present, in choosing not to walk away, even when the situation feels unbearable. And that's what Pierce Brosnan did. He stayed, day after day, year after year. He stood beside her, not as a celebrity, but as a husband facing something he could not control. The world still saw the premieres, the interviews, the polished image of success, but behind that image was a man navigating fear, uncertainty, and the slow realization that love does not always come with a happy ending. This is the part of the story most people never see, the part where success and pain exist at the same time, where the strongest-looking people are often carrying the heaviest weight. And this was only the beginning. Because what came next would test him in a way that no role, no fame, and no amount of success could ever prepare him for. What happened next was not sudden. It did not arrive like a single moment that changes everything overnight. It came slowly, in a way that makes you hope, doubt, and hope again. For Pierce Brosnan, the fight alongside Cassandra Harris lasted for years. Years of believing that things might turn around. Years of holding on to small improvements, to moments where it felt like the worst might be behind them. But reality has a way of revealing itself, no matter how much we try to resist it. The illness did not go away. Ovarian cancer continued its quiet progression, taking more than just physical strength. It began to take time, energy, and the future they had imagined together. And in those final stages, there is something people rarely talk about. It is not just grief that appears. It is helplessness, the kind that no amount of success, money, or recognition can solve. For a man the world saw as controlled and powerful, This was a reality where control no longer existed. In 1991, she passed away. And just like that, everything he had rebuilt from his childhood, everything that gave him a sense of home, was gone again. Loss, when it comes like this, does not feel like a single moment. It lingers. It reshapes the way you see everything. The silence in the house feels different. The absence becomes something you notice in the smallest details. For Pierce Brosnan, this was not just the loss of a partner. It was the loss of the person who had helped him heal. And yet, life did not stop. There were children who still needed him, a career that continued moving forward, responsibilities that do not pause, even when your world does. So he did what many people in that position are forced to do. He kept going, not because the pain was gone, but because stopping was not an option. There is a kind of strength in that, but it is not the kind people celebrate. It is quiet. It is invisible. It is waking up every day and choosing to function, even when part of you is still somewhere in the past. Years passed, and over time, something unexpected happened. He allowed himself to love again. He met Keely Shea Smith, and their relationship became something steady, something supportive, something real. It was not about replacing what he lost. It was about continuing life without denying the past. That distinction matters, because many people believe that moving forward means letting go, but in reality, it often means carrying the past with you while still choosing to live. For a while, it seemed like life had found a new balance. A new chapter had begun. But some stories do not end where we expect them to. Years later, tragedy returned. His daughter, Charlotte Brosnan, who he had raised and loved as his own, was diagnosed with the same illness, ovarian cancer, the same disease that had taken her mother. There are moments in life that feel almost impossible to accept, not because they are unfamiliar, but because they are too familiar. The repetition makes it heavier. It brings back memories you never wanted to relive. For Pierce Brosnan, this was not just another challenge. It was the return of something he had already endured once before. The same fear, the same uncertainty, the same slow unfolding of something he could not control. And in 2013, she passed away. Losing a child is something no parent is ever prepared for. There is no experience that makes it easier, no success that softens the impact. It is a different kind of grief, one that changes a person in ways that are difficult to describe. And for him, it was a second time facing the same kind of loss. At this point, the image the world sees becomes almost irrelevant. Because behind the public figure is a man who has faced loss not once, but twice, in nearly the same way. This is where the idea of strength begins to change. It is no longer about confidence or composure. It is about endurance, about continuing to show up for life, even when it has taken something irreplaceable from you more than once. And yet, he did not disappear. He did not withdraw completely from the world. He continued to act, to speak, to live. Not because the pain was gone, but because life, in its own way, keeps moving forward, whether we are ready or not. And maybe that is the hardest truth in all of this. You do not move on from loss. You move with it. And the real question is not whether pain changes you. It is whether you allow it to stop you completely, or whether you carry it and continue anyway. In the final part, the story is no longer just about tragedy. It becomes about something deeper. How a person continues to live, to love, and to find meaning after experiencing the kind of loss that most people would never recover from. After everything that had happened, the story of Pierce Brosnan is no longer just about loss. It becomes something quieter, something deeper, and far more difficult to understand from the outside. Because the real question is not how much a person can endure. It is what they choose to become after enduring it. By the time he reached his later years, Brosnan had already lived through experiences that would have caused many people to withdraw from life completely. Losing Cassandra Harris was one kind of pain. Losing Charlotte Brosnan years later was another, even heavier kind. And yet, he did not allow those moments to define him in a way that closed him off from the world. Instead, something else began to take shape. A different kind of strength. Not the visible kind that people admire in movies, but the internal kind that shows up in how a person continues to live their life when no one is watching. There is a shift that happens when someone has faced deep loss more than once. The small things begin to matter more. Time feels different. Priorities change. The noise of the world becomes less important compared to the people who are still there. For Pierce Brosnan, that meant focusing on what remained, rather than only what had been taken. His relationship with Keely Shea Smith became a reflection of that mindset. It was not built on perfection or the illusion of a pain-free life. It was built on understanding, on presence, and on the quiet decision to continue loving even after knowing how much it can hurt. That choice is not simple. To love again after loss requires a kind of courage that is rarely talked about, because love always carries risk. And when you have already experienced that risk turning into reality, opening your heart again is not natural. It is intentional, and he chose it anyway. At the same time, he continued to work. Acting was still part of his life, but it no longer seemed like the center of who he was. It became one part of a larger picture, a way to express, to create, but not something that defined his entire identity. This is where many people misunderstand success. They think it is about reaching a certain level and staying there. But for someone who has experienced what Brosnan has, success becomes something else entirely. It becomes about balance, about meaning, about making sure that the life you are living still feels real, even after everything you have been through. There is also something else that begins to emerge in stories like his: perspective. When you have faced loss at that level, many of the things that once seemed important begin to lose their weight. The urgency to prove something to the world fades. The need for constant validation becomes less relevant. What replaces it is quieter, but more grounded. Gratitude for what still exists, respect for time, an awareness that life is not guaranteed to follow any plan. And perhaps most importantly, an understanding that strength is not about avoiding pain, but about continuing despite it. This is why the story resonates with so many people. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is real. Everyone, in some way, will face loss. It may not look the same. It may not happen in the same way. But the feeling of having something important taken away is something almost everyone understands. And the question that follows is always the same. What now? For Pierce Brosnan, the answer was not found in words or statements. It was found in actions, in continuing to show up for his family, in continuing to work, in continuing to live a life that, while marked by tragedy, was not defined only by it. There is a quiet message in that. You do not need to erase your pain to move forward. You do not need to pretend it did not happen. You carry it. You live with it. And over time, it becomes part of your story, but not the entire story. In the end, what makes this story powerful is not the tragedy itself. It is the response to it. Because anyone can be strong when life is easy. But the real measure of a person is revealed when life becomes difficult, when things fall apart, when the future no longer looks the way it once did. And in those moments, what you choose to do next is what defines you. Not the loss, not the pain, but the decision to keep going. That is where real strength lives. There comes a point in every story where the focus is no longer on what was lost, but on what remains. For Pierce Brosnan, that point did not arrive suddenly. It came slowly, shaped by time, reflection, and the quiet realization that life does not pause for grief, no matter how deep it runs. What makes his story different is not just the tragedies he endured, but the way he chose to carry them. Because many people, after facing that level of loss, begin to close themselves off. They protect themselves from future pain by avoiding connection, by limiting how much they invest emotionally in others. But he did not choose that path. Instead, he leaned into life. Not in a loud or dramatic way, but in a steady, grounded way that reflects a deeper understanding of what truly matters. His relationship with Keely Shea Smith is often described as strong, lasting, and genuine. But what makes it meaningful is not just its longevity, it is the foundation it is built on. It is built on the awareness that love is not guaranteed. It is built on the understanding that time is limited. And when you understand both of those things, you begin to treat people differently. You become more present, more intentional, less distracted by things that do not truly matter. This is the kind of perspective that cannot be taught. It is earned. Over time, Pierce Brosnan also began to express himself in ways beyond acting. Painting, for example, became one of the outlets through which he processed emotion. It was not about recognition or success. It was about expression, about taking something internal and giving it form. That is often what people do when words are no longer enough. They create, not for the world, but for themselves. And in that process, there is something quietly healing. There is also a noticeable calm in the way he speaks about life now. In interviews, in public appearances, there is less urgency, less need to prove anything. What replaces it is clarity, a sense that he understands something many people spend their entire lives chasing, that life is not about control. It is about presence, because control can disappear at any moment. As his story shows, no amount of success can prevent unexpected loss. No level of preparation can shield you from everything. But presence is different. It is something you choose. You choose to be there for the people you love. You choose to appreciate what you have while you still have it. You choose to continue, even when part of you would rather stop. This is where the story becomes less about him and more about anyone who hears it. Because at its core, this is not just the story of Pierce Brosnan. It is a reflection of a question everyone will face at some point. How do you live after loss? Not how do you avoid it, not how do you fix it, but how do you continue? There is no single answer, but his life offers a direction. You continue by holding on to what remains. You continue by allowing yourself to feel without letting it stop you completely. You continue by choosing connection, even when you understand the risk. And perhaps most importantly, you continue by accepting that pain is part of the experience of being alive. Not something that makes life meaningless, but something that makes it real. In the end, the tragedy is only one part of the story. What matters more is what came after. Because while loss may shape you, it does not have to define the limits of your life. And the quiet truth behind everything he has been through is this: strength is not about never breaking. It is about continuing, even after you have. By the time you reach this point in the story, it becomes clear that what defines Pierce Brosnan is not the fame, not the roles, and not even the tragedies themselves. It is the way he chose to live afterward. Because there is a moment, after enough time has passed, where pain no longer feels sharp in the same way. It does not disappear, but it changes. It becomes quieter, more integrated into who you are. It shows up in certain memories, certain dates, certain silences. And in those moments, you are faced with a decision. Do you let it pull you backward, or do you allow it to deepen how you move forward? For Brosnan, the answer was not spoken. It was lived. He continued to show up for his family, for his work, and for the life that was still in front of him. Not perfectly, not without emotion, but consistently. And that consistency is where real strength reveals itself. Because moving forward is not a single act. It is something you choose again and again, often on the days when it feels the hardest. There is also something else that becomes visible when you look closely at his life. He did not rush to redefine himself after loss. He did not try to erase the past or replace it with something new as quickly as possible. Instead, he allowed time to do what it does best, to soften the edges, to create space between who you were and who you are becoming. This is important because many people feel pressure to move on quickly, as if grief has a timeline that must be followed. But real healing does not work that way. It is uneven. It is unpredictable. And it often takes longer than anyone expects. What matters is not the speed. It is the direction. And the direction he chose was one of openness, not closure. He remained connected to the memory of Cassandra Harris and Charlotte Brosnan, not in a way that kept him stuck, but in a way that honored their place in his life. That balance is difficult. To remember without being consumed. To feel without being overwhelmed. To continue without forgetting. And yet, that is exactly where meaning is found. Over time, His life began to reflect something that cannot be taught through advice or instruction. It can only be understood through experience. That life does not become easier, but you can become stronger in how you carry it. There is also a quiet humility in that realization. When you understand how unpredictable life can be, you stop assuming that anything is guaranteed. You stop delaying the things that matter. You become more present not because someone told you to, but because you have seen what happens when time runs out. This is why his story resonates beyond celebrity, because it speaks to something universal. Not everyone will experience the same events, but everyone will face moments that test them in ways they did not expect. Moments where the future changes, where plans fall apart, where something important is taken away. And in those moments, the question is always the same. What now? The answer is rarely dramatic. It is not found in a single decision or a sudden transformation. It is found in small, repeated choices. To get up, to keep going, to stay connected, to remain open to life, even after understanding how fragile it can be. That is the quiet message behind everything Pierce Brosnan has lived through. Not that pain can be avoided, not that strength means being unaffected, but that even after loss, even after everything changes, there is still a path forward. And walking that path step by step is what defines who you become in the end. Because the real story was never about tragedy alone. It was about what came after. And the fact that, despite everything, he continued. At the end of this story, what remains is not the image the world first saw, but the truth that slowly revealed itself over time. Pierce Brosnan was never just the man who played James Bond. That was only one chapter, one version of him that the world recognized. The fuller story is quieter. It is the story of a man who experienced absence early in life, who found love, lost it, rebuilt himself, and then faced a similar loss again, not once, but twice. And still, he did not allow those moments to become the final definition of who he was. That is where the meaning of his life begins to shift. Because in the end, people are not remembered only for what they achieve. They are remembered for how they endure. There is something deeply revealing about how a person responds when life takes something from them that cannot be replaced. It exposes what is beneath everything else, beneath the success, the reputation, the image. And in his case, what remained was resilience. Not the loud kind, not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that continues quietly, day after day, without needing recognition. As the years passed, Pierce Brosnan seemed to move through life with a different kind of awareness. There was less urgency, less attachment to the idea of proving anything to anyone. What replaced it was something more grounded, an understanding that time is limited, that the people in your life matter more than the roles you play. That success, no matter how significant, cannot protect you from everything. And that acceptance changes the way you live. It makes you more present, more attentive, more aware of what is real and what is temporary. This is not something that comes from theory. It comes from experience, from having lived through moments that force you to confront the fragility of everything you once assumed was stable. And once you see that clearly, you cannot unsee it. That is why his story does not end in tragedy. It ends in perspective. Because even after everything he has faced, he continued to create, to connect, and to live a life that still held meaning. Not because the past no longer mattered, but because he understood that life does not wait for you to be ready. It moves forward regardless. And the only real choice you have is whether you move with it or remain stuck in what was. For Pierce Brosnan, the answer was clear. He moved forward. Not perfectly, not without memory, but with intention. And maybe that is the final lesson hidden in his story. You do not need to have a perfect life to live a meaningful one. You do not need to avoid pain to find purpose. And you do not need to forget what you have lost in order to keep going. What matters is that you continue, that you allow yourself to experience life fully, even after understanding how unpredictable it can be. Because in the end, strength is not something you are born with. It is something you reveal, piece by piece, in the way you respond to what life gives and what it takes away. And if there is one thing his story makes clear, it is this. Even after the deepest loss, even after everything changes, it is still possible to live with depth, with meaning, and with a quiet kind of strength that does not need to be seen to be real. That is the part of the story the world rarely talks about, but it is the part that matters most. As the story reaches its final chapter, what stands out is not a single moment, but a pattern that has been consistent throughout the life of Pierce Brosnan. A pattern of continuing, not because life became easy, and not because the past stopped mattering, but because he chose, again and again, not to let it define the limits of his future. There is something important to understand here. Most people think strength is something you either have or you don't. They see someone endure loss and assume there is something different about them, something rare. But the truth is more uncomfortable. Strength is often built in moments where there is no other option. Moments where stopping feels easier, but continuing is necessary. And over time, those moments shape you. They change how you think, how you feel, how you respond to everything that comes after. For Pierce Brosnan, those moments came more than once, and each time, he was faced with the same quiet decision: to withdraw or to remain engaged with life. He remained. That choice is not dramatic. It does not come with applause. In fact, most of the time, no one notices it at all, but it is the foundation of everything that followed. Because continuing is not a single act. It is a mindset. It is choosing to stay open to life, even when you understand how much it can hurt. It is choosing to stay connected to people, even when you know nothing is guaranteed. It is choosing to keep building something, even after something else has been taken away. And that is where his story becomes more than just a personal narrative. It becomes a reflection, a reminder that life will not always follow the path you expect, that plans will change, that loss, in one form or another, is unavoidable. But what remains within your control is how you respond. You can close yourself off. You can let the past define the rest of your life. Or you can carry it with you and still move forward. That does not mean forgetting. It does not mean pretending everything is fine. It means accepting that both things can exist at the same time. Pain and purpose, loss and love, memory and movement. This balance is not easy to achieve. It takes time. It takes awareness. And most importantly, it takes a willingness to keep going, even when there is no clear reason to. By the time you look at Pierce Brosnan today, what you see is not just a successful actor or a public figure who once defined an iconic role. You see someone who has lived, someone who has experienced both the highest points and the lowest moments, and who has allowed those experiences to shape him without completely consuming him. That is a rare balance, and it is what gives his story its weight. Because in the end, this was never just about tragedy. It was about resilience. It was about what happens after everything changes. And more importantly, it was about the quiet, often invisible decision to continue living fully, even after understanding how fragile life can be. That is the part most people overlook. But it is the part that stays with you. Because long after the roles fade, long after the spotlight moves on, what remains is not the image. It is the way a person lived. And in that sense, the story of Pierce Brosnan is not defined by what he lost. It is defined by the fact that, despite everything, he never stopped moving forward.